There are moments in real life that feel so unreal, so disturbingly out of place, that your brain almost refuses to process them as truth. And this is one of those moments. Two teenage girls sit in the back of a police car after being arrested for something deeply violent, something that should have shattered them emotionally, something that should have filled that car with silence, panic, or regret. But instead, there's laughter. Not nervous laughter, not the kind people use to hide fear, but genuine amusement. They joke with each other, they talk casually, they even worry about how they'll look in their mugshots, as if this were just an awkward inconvenience instead of the aftermath of something horrifying. And the more you listen, the more unsettling it becomes, because it forces a question that is almost impossible to answer. How can someone do something so extreme and then react like nothing really happened? This is the story of Lois Lippert and Isabelle Valdez, and what makes it so disturbing isn't just what they planned or what they tried to do, it's the mindset behind it. Because this wasn't chaos. It wasn't a sudden outburst of emotion or a mistake made in the heat of the moment. This was something that grew quietly, slowly, almost invisibly, until it crossed a line that most people could never even imagine approaching. And by the time anyone realized how far things had gone, it was already too late to stop it. At first glance, there is nothing remarkable about them. No obvious signs that point to danger, no clear indication that something was deeply wrong beneath the surface. They were just teenagers, living in a world that, on the outside, looked completely normal. School, routines, conversations, friendships, everything appeared ordinary. And that's what makes stories like this so difficult to comprehend, because we expect danger to look like something. We expect warning signs, signals, something that tells us to be cautious. But sometimes, the most disturbing realities are hidden behind the most normal appearances. To understand how things reach this point, you have to look beyond the event itself and focus on what came before it, the thoughts, the influences, the gradual shift in perception that allowed something unthinkable to start feeling, in some twisted way, acceptable. And at the center of that shift is Isabelle. Not as a lone figure, but as someone whose mindset seemed to shape the direction everything else would take. There are reports suggesting that Isabelle had developed an intense fascination with a real criminal case. But calling it fascination almost feels too weak, too harmless of a word to describe what was really happening. This wasn't passive curiosity. This was something deeper, something more consuming. The kind of fixation where the boundaries between interest and admiration begin to blur, where the focus isn't just on understanding what happened, but on feeling drawn to it, pulled into it, almost as if it holds some kind of meaning or appeal. And this is where things start to become dangerous, because ideas, no matter how extreme, often begin in a space that feels disconnected from reality. They exist as thoughts, hypotheticals, conversations, things that seem distant, abstract, and harmless because they haven't been acted on. But the more those ideas are revisited, the more they are discussed, the more they are explored without resistance, the more they begin to feel normal. And once something starts to feel normal, it becomes much easier to imagine turning it into something real. Lois enters this picture not as an outsider, but as someone who becomes part of that environment. Whether it was curiosity, influence, or a shared sense of fascination, she becomes involved in those same conversations, those same ideas, that same slow shift in perception. And this is one of the most important aspects of the story because it shows how powerful shared thinking can be. How two people, reinforcing each other's perspectives, can push boundaries further than either one might have alone. What begins as discussion slowly transforms into something else. The tone changes. The distance between idea and action starts to shrink. And at some point, without a clear, dramatic turning point, the possibility of doing something extreme no longer feels impossible. It starts to feel achievable. And that's the moment where everything changes. Because once a line like that is crossed mentally, the next step is no longer about imagining, it's about planning. Details begin to form, not in a rushed or chaotic way, but in a manner that suggests time, thought, and intention. And what makes this stage so unsettling is not just the presence of a plan, but the absence of hesitation strong enough to stop it. There's no clear moment where reality breaks through and forces everything to stop. Instead, it's as if they are operating inside a version of reality that feels slightly detached from the real one, a space where consequences don't fully register, where the weight of what they are considering doesn't hit as hard as it should. And then eventually, the plan moves forward. What happens next is serious, disturbing, and difficult to process. But even that is not what leaves the strongest impact on people who learn about this case. Because as shocking as the act itself is, what follows afterward creates an entirely different level of discomfort. They are caught, placed into the back of a police car, and in that moment, everything should change. This is where reality is supposed to hit, where the weight of the situation becomes undeniable, where fear, regret, or panic takes over. But instead, something else happens, something that feels completely out of place. They laugh, they talk as if nothing truly significant has just happened. There's a strange lightness in their voices, a tone that doesn't match the situation they're in. They joke with each other, make casual observations, and even focus on things that seem almost trivial compared to the seriousness of what's going on. At one point, they discuss how they might appear in their mugshots, as if they're preparing for a photo that matters socially rather than legally. And it's in these moments that the situation becomes more than just disturbing. It becomes deeply unsettling on a psychological level, because it suggests something that's hard to accept, that they may not fully grasp the reality of what they've done, or that, in some way, it still doesn't feel real to them. There are different ways to interpret behavior like this. Some might argue that it's shock, that their minds are trying to protect them from the weight of reality by disconnecting emotionally. Others might see it as immaturity, a lack of understanding about consequences. But there's another interpretation that feels far more uncomfortable, that their perception of the situation had already shifted long before they were arrested, that by the time everything unfolded, they were already operating in a mindset where the boundaries between right and wrong, serious and trivial, real and imagined, had become blurred. And if that's true, then what we're looking at isn't just a reaction to a situation, but the result of a process that had been developing for a long time, a gradual detachment from reality, a slow erosion of emotional response, a growing fascination that overshadowed everything else. And perhaps the most unsettling part of all is how subtle that process can be, because it doesn't start with something extreme. It doesn't announce itself as dangerous. It begins quietly in small thoughts, in conversations, in moments that don't seem significant at the time. And step by step, without drawing attention to itself, it grows. It reshapes perception. It changes the way things are interpreted, until eventually, it leads somewhere no one expected. Cases like this force us to confront questions that don't have easy answers. Not just about the individuals involved, but about influence, about environment, about how people, especially when they are young, can be shaped by what they focus on, what they consume, and who they share those thoughts with. Because when ideas are reinforced instead of challenged, when fascination replaces critical thinking, when boundaries are pushed without resistance, the outcome can become unpredictable. And that's exactly what makes this story so difficult to ignore. Because it's not just about what happened. It's about how it happened. How something that should feel unthinkable can slowly become thinkable. And then, eventually, possible. And maybe the most chilling part of all is realizing that there was no single moment where everything suddenly went wrong. No dramatic turning point where it was obvious that things had crossed a line. It was gradual, quiet, almost invisible, until it was. And by the time reality finally caught up with them, they were already sitting in the back of that police car, laughing, as if none of it had truly sunk in yet. And that's the moment that stays with people, not just because of what it shows, but because of what it suggests. That sometimes, the most dangerous transformations don't look like transformations at all. They just look normal, until they're not.